Okay, let's see. Am I audible? Let's see. Am I audible? I guess I must be. Let's see. I can't hear myself. Let's say must be. Let's see. Okay, good. Good. I am audible. Good. 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 Okay. Good afternoon. Oh, let me highlight that. It's manners to highlight things. There we go. Okay, we're back to the literature survey. We're doing Irish and Welsh, apart from King Arthur, because we did King Arthur 8 months ago, and then we took a lengthy hiatus. Being a bit distracted lately. Oh, I'll be quiet. Okay, so first, some general remarks about Celtic literature. And pardon me, I'm grabbing, I have a whole bunch of books here to hand that I'm using as sources. And sorry if I was a little muffled just now. So, some general remarks about the literature of Ireland and Wales in particular. We know nothing about Gaulish literature. All we have in Gaulish is a bunch of inscriptions and maybe some coins and things like that. And anyway, that's before this period. We're in the early Middle Ages to high Middle Ages, leading a bit into the late Middle Ages. So, one thing is that narration in Irish and Welsh is generally tends to be in prose. In the rest of Europe, you could use verse for pretty much anything. You had treatises in verse, all that. In the Celtic tradition, it's generally more lyric, more like a commentary on something, or commonly it's praise or blame. That's what it commonly amounts to. A lot of it is trying to get in good with their patrons. So the patrons will give them lots of goodies. So that's what a lot of it was about. And let's see. What other things are to be kept in mind? Even the oldest Celtic literature has influence from the Roman classical tradition. Even the most primitive of the native Irish tales will have this influence, like the Toimbo Cúlainn, which I'll have occasion to talk about more later. Let's see. And elements in imagery like lion and dragon are definitely taken from the classical tradition. So, that said, there are lots of archaic features. The other thing to bear in mind, the relation between Ireland and Wales is complicated and confusing. They were not aware of being Celtic. They didn't have this feeling of commonality necessarily, and some of the Welsh traditions are even kind of hostile to the Irish. However, there was close contact maintained, at least down to the time of the Scandinavian invasions, and perhaps even afterwards, the invasions of the 9th century. And lots of the themes are connected. Oh dear, I said themes. A lot of the themes are connected. There are lots of themes in the Welsh tradition that are best understood in the light of the Irish tradition. So there was a rich oral tradition, and that also included Brittany, which we'll have occasion to talk about later a little bit. And also another thing that they have in common, the Irish and Welsh traditions, is they have prose narratives with incorporated passages in verse for dialogue and for reflective monologue, i.e. for commentary. And we'll find examples of that. The other thing being, there was also another motif being that the poet wields immense power because he has occult, even magical powers. And by praising his patron, so I mean, the large part of his function is basically to praise his patron, as we mentioned. Eulogy and elegy, like mourning after the dead ruler. But these rulers weren't like years from being glorified cattle rustlers. So one of the things I'm praised for is, I'm quoting here from, a lot of this I'm quoting from literature in Celtic countries from the 70s, and the Celtic literature's an essay by Rachel Bromwich in that collection. So the ideal prince is a formidable antagonist and cattle raider, defender of his people, and generous patron of bards. That's very important. The prosperity and fertility of the land are bound up with the ruler. But then there's the inverse of that, which is satire. And the poet supposedly, through satirizing his, like if his patron didn't do what was he wasn't generous enough or whatever, then the poet could satirize him. And I'm quoting again from the essay by Rachel Bromwich. In early Irish sources, we find that a poet's satire could raise boils and blotches on the face and render a whole countryside barren. Let's see. I'm trying to find the footnote. Yeah. Okay, never mind the footnotes. In Wales, the 12th century bard Prydydd y Moch threatens his patron, Gruffydd Cunan, that if he does not send away the inferior poets or his rivals, he will raise a blush on his cheeks that will last forever and will remain as a reproach to his descendants. And as late as 1414, where the annals of the Four Masters tell us that the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, Sir John Stanley, was satirized by the poet Neil O'Higgin, who, and I quote, this is the Lord Lieutenant, lived after this satire but 5 weeks, for he died of the virulence of the lampoons. So, not to be trifled with. Let's see. So the other thing to bear in mind with Wales and Ireland, the social background, basically a lot of little statelets. The imagery, a bunch of conventions that whose origin lies in the past, at least probably in the past, but they may have influenced each other, but they also influenced each other. One thing to bear in mind also is the extreme conservatism. Some of the verse forms that were used in the Middle Ages are still in use today. There seems to be more loyalty among the Irish and Welsh, well, the Welsh anyway, to traditional verse forms than in like metropolitan cultures like the English, or like the English or the French, for example. Half a moment. Let's see if there's anything else I can add to that. Let's see. Pardon me. I'm checking my sources. This is. I'm checking in the. I'm going to check briefly in the introduction to the Triads of the Island of Britain, edited by Rachel Bromwich. So, the bards were taught. The bards were taught by their elders. They were required to learn various triads by heart, and the triads are basically an aid to the recollection of narrative material. So to help the bards remember all these different stories, they grouped them in triads, like in sequences or contrasting pairs, so that they'll remember. And that helps in memorizing these various things, which are mostly used for praise and blame of the patrons. They were required to have an immense repertory of stories and verse in which the native record was preserved. The stories were classified according to subject matter in saga lists in Ireland. For example, the Irish tales are listed under such headings as cattle raids, adventures, conception tales, battles, feasts, elopements, visions, invasions, etc. And they have to. The Book of Leinster says that the bards are required to know 250 príomhscéala, or primary stories, and 100 fóscéala, or subordinate stories. And something similar was going on with the Welsh and their Triads. Some examples of Triads in the Welsh tradition include, this will be easy enough, the three seafarers of the Isle of Britain, the three roving fleets of the Isle of Britain, the three powerful shepherds of the Isle of Britain, the three fettered men of the Isle of Britain, Cadwallad the Blessed, and Hrun son of Maelgwn, and Fiwalaun Broomhair. And this is why those men were called fettered, it explains, because horses could not be obtained that were suited for them, owing to their size. So they attached themselves to their horses with fetters of gold. And now Welsh poetry, I've already given you the basics on Celtic poetry in general. Welsh poetry mostly combines rhyme with alliteration, and it's got very complex rhyme schemes, also a number of syllable count, etc. And as I said, it's mostly praise or blame of patrons. And here we can give half a moment. It's time to as we're moving on to Wales. So let me give you a few examples. The great names in the Welsh tradition. There's the Cynfeirdd, or the early bards. Then there's the Goginfeirdd, or rather early bards of the High Middle Ages. And then, that's Cynfeirdd is spelled Cynfeirdd. Goginfeirdd is spelled Gogynfeirdd, and I'm probably butchering those words horribly. But the traditional Cynfeirdd are Taliesin, Taliesin, Aneirin, Aneirin, I believe. I need to check on that. Just quickly check that. Yes. Myrddin, Myrddin, and Llywelyn, that's Lly Warch space, then Hen. Hen means old. Myrddin, the name Myrddin is the ancestor of the name Merlin, the magician. They couldn't. Joffrey of Monmouth got rid of the D in the name and replaced it with an L so that it wouldn't be. Otherwise, it would have been. Otherwise, people would have been outraged or would have laughed because Merdinus in Latin is not a very impolite word. So, time to actually get with it here. Let's see. So here's a little example. Here are a couple of examples. Here's Taliesin. Oh, incidentally, there's a story about Taliesin. There was a lady named Ceridwen, Ceridwen, and she had the cauldron of poetic inspiration. And she had like a little servant boy named Gwion Vach. Now, all these names. Gwion space Fach. And he accidentally tasted a bit of the cauldron and got the poetic inspiration. Ceridwen was annoyed and chased after them, and they changed into various things. Obviously, eventually he got away. And here is a poem that's attributed to him in praise of the princes of the 6th century in northern Britain. Urien and his son Owain. And Owain, incidentally, later becomes a figure in Arthurian legend. So it says, Owain courageously attacked his enemies like a wolf pursuing sheep. He was a handsome man in his multicolored armor, who gave horses as gifts to those who asked him. Owain I cospes in rut, malknut in dilut devet, bur gwiw uch I amliw seirch, a rode verch I eichet. Now, Aneirin writes from the territory of the Godolphin, situated between the Forth and the Tyne, and again in northern Britain. Warriors went to Catterick. They were a ready host. Their drink was new mead, and it proved to be bitter. There were 300 fighting under command, and after elation there was silence. Wir aith gatraith, oid vraith, aithu, glasved e hanquin, a gwenwyn vu, trichant trwy baeriant in Qatar. Agwedi eluch taweluch vu. And again, I'm probably butchering the language, but that's the best I can do. And here's another, pardon me, here's another bit of Old Welsh poetry before I move on. Actually, not Old Welsh, medieval Welsh, Middle Welsh. Springtime is the fairest season. Loud are the birds, green the groves. Plows furrow, ox are yoked. Green is the sea, many-colored the lands. When the cuckoos sing on top of the splendid trees, grows more my despair. Kinteven Cainhau Amser, Diar Adar, Glas Kalet, Eredir Inrich, Ich Iget, Gwirt. Actually, I think it would be Gwirth, wouldn't it? Probably. Gwirth more Rithotor Tiret, etc. So, now mythology proper. The Welsh remnants of mythology are, there's not an awful lot compared to Ireland. There's a fair bit from Ireland, but in Wales it's kind of limited. There's and a lot of it is in late manuscripts. The best known source, the two best known sources are the Mabinogion and the Triads and Ysbrydain. The latter being the Triads of the island of Britain, which I mentioned earlier. Half a moment. The Mabinogion are basically a bunch of stories that are put together that are not all necessarily at all connected. They were put together in a manuscript. They were published in the mid-19th century by, what was her name? I want to say her name was Lady Charlotte Guest, but let me check. Come on, get me the. Oh, come on, tell me. Lady Charlotte Guest. Right, I am the man. 1838 to 1849. So what we have is 4 of them are very loosely connected in that they share some characters, and they're called the 4 branches of the Mabinogi. These are Pwyll, Lord of Dyfed, Bronwyn, daughter of Llyr, Manawydan, son of Llyr, Math, son of Mathonwy. Apart from that, we have a couple of tales of the early years of early British rulers. The Dream of Moxen, very, 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 very loosely based on an historical figure. Maximus, who rebelled in the 4th century AD. He he tried to claim the throne of the Roman Empire, but he was defeated. And he was turned into a kind of a British hero later. And the other one is Cú and Finn, which is connected to stories in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. And where various supernatural invasions occur and do nasty things, and the ruler Cú has to take advice from his brother Finn as to how to deal with them. So that's the Mabinogion. The remaining stories in the collection all have to do with Arthur, so I talked about them last time. How Cú won Olwen, which is a best source for the native Welsh tradition, uninfluenced or relatively uninfluenced by the French. The Dream of Fronabwy, which is basically a satire, partly comparing how the rulers of the 12th century are kind of wrought compared to King Arthur, but also making fun of King Arthur himself a bit too. The remaining three are called the Romances, and all definitely have French influence. That's Owain, Peredur, and Geraint. So the ones I'm going to talk about here are briefly the ones from the four branches. That's the most archaic. Oh, wait. Half a second here. Half a second here. Oh, that's too bad. Oh, sorry. I just, a friend of mine is under the weather. What? No, you stupid thing. Sorry. My computer thinks I'm trying to mute something when I'm actually just trying to click on it. So, what happens in Pwyll, Lord of Dyfed? It starts where Pwyll is rude to an otherworld king, a king from the otherworld. So he has to. So, in order to make up for this, he has to take the place of the king and fight his enemy, the otherworld king's enemies, for him. And he also has to resist the temptation to sleep with the otherworld king's wife. Now, probably in the original version, we just would have up and slept with her. But this has been civilized. The Welsh have got a bit civilized by the time these stories reached their final form. That's not anyway. That probably wasn't the best way of putting it. Anyway. The second part has to do with his winning his wife, Rhiannon, And the third part, it gets confusing. His wife is accused of killing her son, but actually it was stolen by evil supernatural beings. So here is the bit. So here is the bit where Preet has set his dogs. There's a pack of dogs has overtaken a stag and brought it down, and this is actually significant. The dogs in the pack are white with red ears, which indicates that they're supernatural beings. But he approaches anyway and drives off the strange hounds and baits his own on the stag. But then suddenly a rider turns up and says, "Chieftain, I know who you are, but I will not greet you." "Well," replied Priest, "perhaps your rank prevents your doing so." "God knows it is not the degree of my rank which prevents me." "What else, chieftain?" asked Priest. "Between me and God," said the stranger, "your own rudeness and discourtesy." "Chieftain, what discourtesy have you seen in me? In no man have I seen greater discourtesy than driving away the pack which has killed a stag and baiting one's own pack upon it. That was your discourtesy, and though I will take no vengeance, between me and God I will dishonor you to the value of 100 stags." "Chieftain," said Priest. That's Pwyll, by the way. "If I have done wrong, I will earn your friendship." "How?" asked the other. "As befits your rank, only I do not know who you are." "I am a crowned king in my own land." "Lord, good day to you," said Priest. "What land do you come from?" "Annuvin," said the other. "I am Araun, king of Annuvin." "Lord, how can I earn your friendship?" "This is how," said Araun. "There is a man, Halfdan, king of Annuvin, whose realm borders on mine, and he is constantly waging war against me. By ridding me of his oppression, which you can do easily, you will earn my friendship." And so forth. So later on, so in the next section, we'll just quote this section. Actually, you know what? Sorry, I'm going to have to move. Actually, no. Okay. So basically, this lady turns up riding a horse very slowly, and no one can catch up with her. And Proust tries to, and he runs after her. But he can't reach her. Then he called out, "Lady, for the sake of the man you love best, stop for me." "I will gladly," said she, "and it would have been better for your horse had you asked me that earlier." So that's that. Bronwyn, daughter of Llŷr. And here we get some of the less than wonderful relations that are assumed to exist in this story between Ireland and Wales. The main character is actually Bran, Bran, ruler over all Britain. Um, so, so um, what happens is the Irish are visiting the British because they want to marry Bronwyn. Now, unfortunately, Bron has an annoying brother named Evnisian, who he's offended. He thought he was being dissed at the banquet for the marriage, at the wedding banquet. So he maimed all the horses of the Irish. So Bron has to give them compensation, but when the Irish come home, they decide, nah, we don't accept it, and they mistreat Bronwyn. So in part two, the British are outraged by Bronwyn's sufferings and initially accept compensation, but then reject it. And there's a whole huge screaming war between the British and the Irish, which leaves only 7 of the British there, and I think only 5 of the Irish are left at the end. So here's the bit where Matholwch is asking the British what the blazes is going on. First, he leaves. He's leaving. God knows. And they ask him, why is he leaving? God knows, he answered. Had I only known, I should not have come here. Still, a strange thing has happened to me. What is that? First, I was given to wife Bronwyn, daughter of Llŷr, one of the 3 great queens of this island, and daughter of the king of the island of the mighty. And then I was insulted. I find it strange that the intended insult was not done before so excellent a girl as she was given to me. So then they find out about that horses were maimed and blah blah blah. Okay. So Bron invades. And Bron is clearly a supernatural being. He's so big that he can just serve as a bridge for his entire army. Now the British are in Ireland and they're fighting and they're trying to make peace. So the peace was made. So the peace was made, and the condition of the peace is that a house be built large enough to fit Bron, because no house is large enough for him. The peace was made, and the house was built large and sturdy, but the Irish set a trap. They fixed a pig on every one of the 100 pillars in the house, and hung a leather bag on each peg, and put an armed man in each bag. When Evnisian entered the house, he noticed the leather bags. "What is in that bag?" he asked an Irishman, and the man answered, "Flour, friend." Whereupon Evnisian fumbled with the bag until he found the warrior's head, and then squeezed it until he perceived his fingers sinking through the bone. And the same thing happens again and again. And And eventually he sings a verse. This is another example of the verse being interspersed with prose. There is in these bags a kind of flower, champions, fighters, attackers in battle, warriors ready for the foe. So basically a lot of killing happens, but the Irish keep winning because they have the cauldron of regeneration. But then Efnisien sneaks in and breaks it, dying in the attempt. So what victory there was went to the men of the island of the mighty. Well, there was no victory save for the escape of 7 men. And at that Bronn had been wounded in the foot with a poisoned spear. The 7 who escaped were Pryderi, Manawydan, Glyniau, son of Taran, Taliesin, Inaug, and a couple of other random people. So here we go. So Bronn commands them to cut off his head and bury it there. And you will spend 7 years feasting it. So they go there and they feast until eventually somebody. So meanwhile, in Ireland, so Bronwyn looks at Ireland and at the island of the mighty and what she could see, and she says, "Alas, son of God, woe that I was ever born, for 2 good islands have been destroyed on my account." And with that, her heart broke, and so she dies of grief. So they spent like about a century. Meanwhile, the other warriors spent about a century hanging out with Bronn and partying. Until, unfortunately, some idiot answers the door, opens the door to the building where they are, and then, of course, they become conscious of every loss and relative that they've lost, and they're in grief, and they have to escape, and they have to leave and go back. So Manawydan, son of Llyr, alone among the tales of the Mabinogion, Manawydan, with its peculiar opening sentence, after the 7 men we mentioned above, shows an awareness of and a dependence on outside material. In this case, the first 2 branches. So basically what happens in this story, I'm a little more unclear on this story. But let's see. Basically, these 7 people set out and they feast at the court of Arberth, but during the feast, a mist falls, and they find themselves in a wasteland, a deserted wasteland. So they look around, they can't find anything or anyone, so they set out for a different town. And they work at various crafts, and they're so good at it. that the rivals try to kill them. So then they arrive at the court. At a court, they enter a fortress. Pryderi wants to enter the fortress. Mabinogion tells him, "No, I'd recommend you not do so. For whoever placed the enchantment on the land must have also caused this building to appear." "God knows I will not give up my dogs," said Pryderi. So he goes in, and he sees neither man nor beast, nor boar, nor dogs, nor house, nor dwelling. But what he sees instead is a golden bull. And he tries to grab the bull, but as soon as he does, he sticks to the bull and he can't speak. And so Rhiannon goes after him, but experiences the same thing. And so they go on. Eventually, it turns out that what happens is he returns to his farm. I'm sorry, I'm trying to summarize this as I go. And all the crops are being eaten. It turns out they're being eaten by mice. He says he will hang the mouse. Then a whole bunch of clergy come up and say, "Please do not hang the mouse." And eventually a bishop comes. So the bishop says, "What sort of work are you about?" "Hanging a thief. I call stealing from me. Isn't that a mouse? Isn't that a mouse I see in your hand?" "Yes, that is the thief." "Well, since I have come upon the destruction of the creature, I will buy it from you. Lest such a noble man be seen destroying such a worthless animal, I will give you £7 for it. Let it go, and you shall have the money. Between me and God, I will not let it go. If you will not let it go, for that I will give you £24 in ready money. Only let it go." And he keeps upping the ante in terms of what he's willing to give. Finally, he says, "As you will not take that, I ask you to name your price." Mabinogion answered, "I want the release of Pryderi and Rhiannon. You shall have that. Between me and God, that is not all. What else? The removal of the spell and enchantment from the 7 contraves of Dyved." A contrave is like a unit of, like a province, roughly. "You shall have that too, only free the mouse. Between me and God, I will not. I wish to know who the mouse is. She is my wife, otherwise I would not ransom her." And then he explains who he was. "I am Llwyd, and it is I who enchanted the 7 contraves of Dyved. I did this for revenge. Out of friendship for Gwawl, son of Clwyd." I guess this is revenge for something that happens in the story of priests where they play the game of badger in the bag with Gwawl, which means basically they put him in a bag and they beat him up. So he explains the whole thing. "Between me and God, I will not. Now release her. Between me and God, I will not. What else do you wish? Your promise that there will never be any spell on the 7 contraves of Dyved, and that none will ever be cast. You shall have that, only release my wife. Between me and God, I will not. What else do you wish? Your promise that no revenge ever be taken on Pederi or Rhiannon or on me because of this. You shall have all that. God knows that was a good thought. Had you not struck on that, all the harm would have landed on your own head. So, I need to go soon, but I think I'm pretty close to finishing the Welsh part anyway, the Irish way. The Irish will probably have to wait till next week. So Math, son of Mathonwy. This is also in North Wales. So it's a little confusing and complicated. There's this king named Math who can only live as long as his feet are in a virgin's lap. And no comment. But someone rapes the virgin, and so there's this chap named Gwydion who helps his nephew rape the virgin, whose name is Gilvaithwy. So he punishes them by turning them into male-female animals and forcing them to mate. Yes. So gender bending in ancient Welsh, gender bending plus furries. So in the second section, there's an Aran Hrod who bears a child. And Gwydion. So Gwydion. So Gwydion. Apparently, Gwydion has a son by her. It's very unclear. A lot of these stories, they're very attractive and appealing, but in terms of basic narrative logic, the form they've come down to us, they're kind of lacking. It seems like there must have been some kind of confusion here, because it's often unclear just what is going on. So I'm trying to present this in a more or less clear way, but the actual story is not as clear. What seems to have happened is Gwydion raped Aranhrod, and we've forgotten about Gilvaithwy, which we couldn't pronounce her name anyway. Gilvaethwy. So we've moved on from her, and we're on to Aranhrod, which is Ranrhod. I think it might actually be Aranhrod, I'm not sure. No, Aranhrod. And she has a son. There's a whole bunch of things she will not do. She will not give him a name. He will not have a name until I give him one. He will not have armor until I give him one. And so he has to trick her into giving the kid a name and armor. The kid's name is Lleu. That's Lleu. This name is probably related to the Welsh name Lugh, Lugh. And she won't let him have a wife. So Gwydion gives him Wait, I'm wrong. Gilvaithwy is the nephew. I'm sorry, Gilvaithwy wasn't the virgin who got raped. Gilvaithwy is the nephew who raped her. Gwaywyn is the name of the lady who got raped before Aranrod. Yes, this story is not very. At least the people who do the raping get punished. So there is that. So the person who. So Gwaywyn is Goewyn, but we've moved on from her, and so what happens is Slay is given a wife, but she's made out of flowers, and she cheats on him. She has an affair with Goronwy. They murder him, and he has to get punished. Meanwhile, in part one of the story, there's an episode with Pryderi, and who gets cheated out of the magical swine of Aran. So that's that. And before I go off to my lunch, I need to mention a couple of things from Triads and Finn. I'm going to mention one thing because I'm running out of time. Let's see. And here we are. Here we actually have something which connects the Welsh legends. For whatever reason, the Welsh myths and legends seem to have more, possibly because of the Arthurian connection to some of them, they seem to have more influence than the Irish on modern literature. Because I remember back in the 70s and 80s, I was reading I had a retelling of the tales of one of the tales of the Mabinogion, and we're going to get something right now that is referred to in the Black Cauldron, and that's the Sow Henwen, Old White. She's a Let me see if I can find the actual source, because they actually give the text here, which is nice. The three powerful swineherds of the island of Britain, and their names are Pryderi, son of Pwyll, Dristan, son of Tasuch, who, this was Tristan. He had the swine of March, son of Merchiaun. Arthur and March and Kai and Bedwyr were there, but they did not succeed in getting so much as one pigling, neither by force, nor by deception, nor by stealth, from Tristan. So that's a bit different from the Tristan story you may be familiar with. So the third of the three powerful swineherds of the island of Britain is Coll, that's C-O-L-L, son of Cosrewi. I don't bother spelling that. And he has a pregnant sow named Henwen. And it was prophesied that the island of Britain would be the worst for the womb burden. And Arthur assembled the army of the island of Britain and set out to destroy her. And then this sow went about to Pharaoh. And I'm not sure what Pharaoh means. F-A-R-R-O-W. Is that some weird way of saying give birth to? All right. Sorry. I just need to check this. A litter of pigs. Give birth to a litter of pigs. Okay, so learn a new word. Pharaoh, F-A-R-R-O-W. Specifically to give birth to pigs. Is that all, or can it mean? It has to be pigs. Yep. Apparently it has to be pigs. Pigs only. And then the sow went about to Pharaoh, and at Fenrin Austin in Cornwall she entered the sea, and the powerful swineherd after her. And in the wheat field in Gwent she brought forth a grain of wheat and a bee. And therefore from that day to this, the wheat field in Gwent is the best place for wheat and bees. And at Llonion in Pembroke she brought forth a grain of barley and a grain of wheat. Therefore the barley of Llonion is proverbial. At the hill of Caverthuch in Arvon she brought forth a wolf cub and a young eagle. The wolf was given to Bear Guide. That's what it says here. That's the question mark is in the edition here, and the eagle to Breat, a prince of the north, and they were both the worse for them. And at Llanfair in Arvon under the black rock she brought forth a kitten, and a powerful swineherd, that must be Coll, threw it from the rock into the sea. And the sons of Palug fostered it and moaned to their own harm. And that was Palug's cat, and it was one of the three great oppressions of Moan. Moan is Anglesey, island off the north coast of Wales, nurtured therein. So and that is, I do need to mention, before I go, I need to mention a couple of other bits of Welsh poetry very quickly. Let's see. Let's see the next slide. The spoils of Annwn, I think I mentioned that before, though, are a bunch of Arthur and a bunch of his warriors go to the other world, Annwn, to get the cauldron of regeneration there. The prophecy of Britain, is that really what the word Armas Prydain means? I need to check that. which is basically political Sea of Britain, yes. It's basically calling everyone in the island of Britain, all the Welsh princes, the Scots, and the Irish, and the Vikings, under Welsh leadership, needless to say, to drive the Anglo-Saxons from Britain forever. And that's, but the fact that okay, what it says here and what Wikipedia says is that the Welsh, or some of the Welsh, were frustrated with the pragmatic, peaceful policies of King Hywel towards the Kingdom of Wessex, who had gained preeminence over all the people of the island, at least south of Scotland. So and in fact an alliance was formed, but it was defeated. So that's that. And I need to stop here and get ready for lunch and do some things, but we'll be back to talk about Irish materials next time. Hopefully that will be sometime next week, or later this week, or early next week. So I'm going to head out now, have a riot,